Well, good morning. We're going to begin this morning. It is quite early here at my house this morning. We're going to begin this morning with pivot points of the pivot point study. We hope you're enjoying this and welcome to this study today. I've had to move off of my back porch this morning. The winter weather is beginning to move in, so we're inside today. But we welcome you to a continuing study of the pivot points. So let's begin. Let me pray and ask God to bless us. Father, thank you this morning that you're in control of the weather and our lives. And we thank you for the people who are watching this study this morning on the pivot points. Give them insight and blessing. Open their hearts and let them apply these truths to their lives. In Christ we pray. Amen. Well, Noah and his family had come off the ark and they started up their lives again. They started in what today is called Turkey, modern day Turkey, on Ararat, the mountain there of Ararat. Before the flood, Noah and his family were farmers. They raised grapes. We know they had vineyards, and probably they kept herds as well. The reason we know that they were farmers prior to the flood is because after they got off the boat, after the ark was landed on Ararat, they got off, and the first thing they did was to plant vineyards. And I'm sure then they had crops, and cattle, and all that they were caring for there. Noah had sons. He had three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And that were his three sons. God spoke to Noah in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, after they got off the ark. And his prime directive that he had for Noah and his children was to reproduce, to refill, and to repopulate planet Earth, because of course the flood had devastated life, wiped off all the life living on the planet's surface, and so now it's time to repopulate and to fill it again. So God in 9:1 had one prime directive that he gave to Noah and his sons, of course. And that was to fill the earth, to spread out, not to stay in one place, not to stay around there, Ararat in Turkey, but to spread out, to go all over the world, to go to, from Turkey, of course, it was they could walk then to the east and north and go up into Europe. They could then go down through the Middle East, to the ancient Near East, and run on down even into Egypt and Africa. So the land bridges were all there. They could move out and do whatever they needed to do. God said, spread out, fill the earth, fill the planet, reproduce. That was the prime directive. That was the number one thing that God had told him to do. Now, I got a feeling that there was a reluctance to do that because there's security in numbers. You know, we all feel safer around family and people, and they could protect each other and guard each other. And also, we need to remember what these people have been through. They have been through that horrid, almost unimaginable pre-flood time there with the hybrid offspring of the fallen watcher angels and human women. And then they lived through the violence and the genetic manipulation. They lived through some horrible, horrible things prior to the flood. And then, of course, the flood. And that's traumatic enough. So they've been through a lot, these people have. And so now we get on the other side of the flood, and I'm sure there is a strong urge, a tendency to want to just stay together. But God said, spread out, fill the earth. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because when we get a little further in our study today, we're going to come across a man named Nimrod, and Nimrod, he didn't want to spread out. He told God no. God said go. Nimrod said no, and so we'll flesh that out a lot more later. But these were difficult times, and the people that got off the ark had been through a lot, but it was time for them to spread out and repopulate the earth. Now, what we're going to get into in a little bit is Nimrod. And of course, today we're going to be dealing with the Tower of Babel and Nimrod. And most Christians, most Bible students, don't really understand the full story of Nimrod. It wasn't just a little child story that we tell. Now, I know that's where most of us heard the story for the first time, was in Sunday school, Bible school, whatever. And they taught us about a tower and the people that were there. And we went by it pretty fast because that we didn't get, there was not a lot of the story, there. It was just kind of tied onto the end of the ark and the flood story. But there is so much in this that we need to deal with today. And so we're going to dig into it. So they told, God said, spread out. God said, go, no, and Nimrod said, no. And so the people, they wanted to gather together. And I want you to let's just a little bit early into the story, but I want you to notice that they wanted to build a city. They want to stay together, build a city with a tower in it. Now, their reasoning, their rationale for this was they wanted to make a name for themselves. That's, if you read that closely there, they wanted to make a name for themselves. See, first of all, one of the early sins, or one of the most common sins for humanity, is we want to be appreciated. We want to be liked. We want to be recognized for what we can do and who we are. And so they wanted to build a name for themselves. So as time went by, the people who were living in the post-flood world, these people could look back to Nimrod and those folks and say, wow, they were amazing people. They built towers. They built cities. See, that's what they wanted. They wanted to be known for their technology, their ingenuity, for their hard work. They wanted to build a name. And folks, we have to be careful because the tendency to do that without God is a terrible mistake. You see, if your fame, if your legacy, if your reputation is, if you're trying to be liked by man, by other human beings, and not by God, you're going in the wrong direction. The Lord God is the one that we must have that likes us and gives us our fame. Our recognition, our fame, our hope is in the Lord. And if it's in anything else, we're going in the wrong direction. Now, then also they want to build a city. Now, why a city? Well, a city was a place where they could be safe. It's protection. And again, the same thing goes. If we're trying to find our protection in anything but in God, we're looking in the wrong place. Now, I know this is a difficult time. These are hard days right now as we're coming up on the election in the United States. This is late October as I'm recording this, and we're just a week or two away from our general election, and we hear all kinds of crazy stories and rumors and of rioting and all kinds of crazy stuff. But we want protection. I hear a lot of preppers. I read about a lot of preppers who they're talking about guns and food and storage of water and protecting yourself and all those things. But our protection has to be in the Lord. Now, I'm not saying don't do those other things. That's what we do here, is try to put together some material protection for ourselves. Food, guns, water, gold, those sorts of things. But if our hope and our protection is not in the Lord, there's nothing can save us. So these people, that's kind of what they did without God. They were angry at God, I'm sure, and wanting to rebel against Him. Now, time passes, and we get to Genesis 11, and we encounter the rebellion to disperse. That's in Genesis 11. I want to get from my lecture notes here. I want to look there, and on page, if you follow there on the second paragraph, Genesis 11:14, where God said, in essence, He said, "Go." God said, "Go," and Nimrod said, "No." I said, here is what it says: "Let us all go to Shinar and build a city and a tower, so we can stay together." Now, Shinar was a plain in Mesopotamia under the Assyrian Babylonian rule. It was there. It was a plain. In other words, it was not it was next to a river, but it was a flat place. It was a good place to build. It was a good place to live. And so they went to this plain and they built their city there and their tower so they can stay together. Nimrod then gathered the people. Nimrod gathered all of the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and he pulled them all together, wouldn't let them spread out like God had said. And he moved them to get there. One thing about Nimrod was he was called a great hunter, and I suspect that it was more that he hunted men than it was animals, because, of course, the only animals at that time would have been the descendants of the animals that came all over on the ark. So I got a sense that Nimrod gathered people together, he hunted them, and pulled them together. The reason was he wanted to build a world empire. He wanted to be the emperor of the first world government. This was a new world order. This was the first, and he wanted to build this empire. They had, as I said, they had been through a lot, and so this tower and the gathering together, they sensed they had a feeling of protection from this. If you will remember, they said that we're going to build bricks and we're going to fire them so that they'll be hard, etc. And then they're going to build the tower out of these fired bricks. And it gives you pause to think they may have remembered what God said. Could they have remembered that story? And they said, well, God said he wasn't going to destroy the earth by water, but next time it would be by fire. And so they knew God would do it because they just lived through it, or at least their ancestors lived through it. And so they said, well, maybe next time he's going to destroy it by fire. So we're going to build a fireproof tower so that God cannot get us the next time he tries to destroy the earth. Well, a lot of hubris in that, a lot of pride and arrogance. This was the first rebellion that was gathered after the flood. This is the first one. The tower began to be built about 700 years after the flood, and there were 2,354 years from the beginning of the world, from the time of Adam to the confusion of the Tower of Babel. So to give you a rough idea of where this falls in history, it's several thousand years have passed since Adam, and we're now down to about 700 years after the flood. Now remember, people lived a long time back in those days, so lives that were not so many generations into the story, but a lot of time has passed. The Tower of Babel was built roughly, it took a little over 100 years to build it, 107 years, some say, some researchers have decided. Now, let me just stop right now and look at the rebellions that's gone on since the Bible has told us about. First of all, we have the rebellion in heaven with Lucifer. Lucifer came to the place that he had told God, I will be like the Most High. I'm going to ascend the heights of the mountain where God's throne resides, and I'm going to be God, and I'm not going to do what he said anymore. That was the first rebellion. Of course, then that led to the other angelic rebellion and the war in heaven, etc. Then the next rebellion that we come across is Adam and Eve. And there they were told not to eat the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. But they did. They rebelled against God. They were tempted by Lucifer, by the serpent, and then they ate the fruit, and then their eyes were opened. They became sinners, and then we know the rest of the story. But that was the second rebellion. The third rebellion we find in the book of Enoch was the watcher angels who had been assigned to planet Earth as to watch over the progression of the planet as it evolved and changed over time. They were there to guard and to guide and to be God's representatives and God's ambassadors or whatever over the planet Earth. They watched it. They watched the stages of the day creation. They were there when God was making things, and then they managed and watched over it. And then, of course, we read in Enoch that they left their first assignment. In other words, and Jude tells us this also, and where we learned that they were given an assignment to watch, but they were looking over humanity when we got here, and they saw us interact with our wives and husbands and our families, and they wanted children. They became enamored with lustful over women, and they wanted to have families and to have a sexual relationship with human women, and they did. And this hybridization was not God's plan. It went against all that God wanted. And so that was the third rebellion, when the watcher angels left their first assignment. And then, of course, we come to Nimrod, and this is the very fourth rebellion. So what exactly did they do? Well, they built a tower so that they could, and the Bible says, and the tower would reach unto heaven. Well, did they think that they were going to reach all the way to God's heaven where God lives? See, the Hebrew concept of heaven, one of the heavens began in the atmosphere, just above the earth, an inch above the earth, up through the stratosphere, ionosphere, up to our last layer of Earth's atmosphere. And then there's the universe, or the outer space. That is the second heaven. Third heaven, of course, is where God lives. Did they think that their tower was going to reach into heaven physically by being tall? And then the question always comes up is, if it was just tall, then why did they build it on a plane? Why didn't they go on a mountaintop and start building it to give them a little head start, or whatever? You get the point. Now, here's my opinion. I want you to get this. This is my opinion. This is not biblical. This is, this is just what I think. So you just use that or throw it away, whatever. But I wonder if the Tower of Babel was not more of a technological machine with all kinds of fallen angel technology and wizardry. And were they going to open with this tower a portal into a dimension, another dimension? You see, God lives in another dimension. He doesn't live in even our universe, even in the second heaven. He lives in another way. And so were they going to actually to build this machine, kind of like the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider that is there in Switzerland area, Geneva? Are they going to build something like that? It makes you wonder. Maybe the tower wasn't just tall, but it was some kind of an ancient machine, a very high technological machine to open a dimensional rift, a portal into heaven. Well, it sure makes you wonder. Whatever it was, whatever the tower was, I don't think it caused a potential problem for God, because who knows? God's God. He could have wiped it out with a thought, with the word of his mouth. It could have been gone. But for some reason, God came down to the tower and confounded the languages, as we know, and put an end to the building of the tower. So why did God have to come down? That's something that has concerned me, which gives credence to the idea that the tower had some potential. Not that it would have ever attacked God but it had potential. So God came down and dealt with it, confounded the languages. Now, this week, this is October of 2020, and this week they're planning to start up the New Hadron Collider that's been shut down for about a year as they've been working on it and giving it a lot more power and making it stronger. They're planning to start it up this week. And I'm anxious to read the reports and to hear what happens, because they're hoping to open a rift, a portal into another dimension. And if you think I'm nuts, go to their website and read some of the things that they plan to do. Read some of the speeches of the ladies and gentlemen that run the place and do the deep thinking. They plan to open a portal, a rift, a tear in the dimensional liner between our world and another world. And they say, we hope something comes out of it, and or we may send something through it. Well, that is quite an amazing thing, but it gives me a lot of concern because this is the place, I believe, in another dimension, is where God hid the fallen angels that were so terrible they couldn't be turned loose on the planet Earth. He put them in what's called the abyss, and he put them in this in Hebrew or Greek it's called the abuso, but they put them in the abyss to lock them up until the times of the end times, when of course they will be loosed again in the tribulation. They will be released, and will come out on the earth. And there's a lot of accounts of that is in the Bible. So if that's what CERN is tinkering with, is the door or the gateway to that other dimension where God has locked these vile and evil beings up, oh my, we could really be heading for some trouble. The flood, of course, primarily cleansed the earth of these beings, of their existence, and the genetic pollution and all. But in Enoch chapter 8, verse 1 of Enoch, we learn that forbidden knowledge was passed to humanity by these beings. These angels who came from heaven, who came to the earth, but see, they had all of heaven's knowledge and wisdom. They came with technologies and sciences and mathematics that human beings had not developed. They came with this hidden, forbidden knowledge, and they passed it on then through to their children, which were the half-breed humans and angels, and they passed them on, and that's why the flood was sent, to wipe that all out. I'm going to go to my study notes and read you there what it says from the book of Enoch. And Azazel, he's the leader of the watcher class angels, taught men to make swords and daggers and shields and breastplates. Now listen to this. And he showed them the things after these, and the art of making them. Let me read that again. The things after these. Okay, we get it. He made swords, daggers, shields, and breastplates. Yeah, we got that. But then he said, and the things after these, and the art of making them. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means it wasn't rudimentary, crude, primitive clubs and swords and shields that he made that we see in Middle Ages, that they used in the Middle Ages. He did teach them those, but, and the things after these. So notice what was, as weaponry progressed, as technology progressed, what would be the next step, and then the next step. And we don't know how far this went. We simply do not know. Could they have had a technological culture that would rival ours today in the 21st century? Well, it's possible. I have read some people who have let their imaginations run a little wilder, and it said maybe they even had space flight. And so you get the idea. This technology was very advanced for humanity, as they showed us the things after these and the art of making them. There was a program initiated by our United States government following World War II, whereby we brought all the German Nazi scientists, not all, but some of the German Nazi scientists, we brought them to the United States under the program called Paperclip. And we brought them here, and we gave them homes. We established their residence, brought their families here, but then we used them and they built our space program. Our Werner von Braun was a Nazi, and he came over here, and he led NASA. That was helped get NASA started, and he led our space program and built it out of his intelligence. And then there were a lot of the German scientists who came, the physicists who came here. They are the ones who built the atomic bomb that we dropped on the Japanese people at the end of World War II. So he asked these people. There has been reports that when they were interviewed and asked the question, how did you guys, you Germans, how did you get such a jump on us technologically? How come your math and your physics and your metallurgy studies are so far advanced of ours? And they would say, we had help. We had help. And they called them aliens or whatever, but they said they gave us technology. Well, that just makes great sense to me. It fits right in with what we've been studying with the fallen angels. The rumors exist even that the United States and other Western world countries have a secret space force that is a breakout society that's far advanced of our NASA and whatever, and that it's been in existence since the late 50s or 60s, and that's a little bit mind blowing to think that they've been able to keep this secret from us, if it is true, of course. But some of the things that give you pause and scratch your head and you is one of the things that has blown my mind is what Ben Rich said at his retirement. When he retired, he was making a speech to the people. Ben Rich was a head of the research area at Area 51, the secret Air Force base that's not so secret anymore. But he was the head of the research and development of that. And when he retired, after being there through that whole deal, he said these words: "We now have the technology to take E.T. home." Well, if you watch the movie E.T., he always wanted to go home, and they came and got him, I think. I've forgotten exactly. But Ben Rich said, we now have the technology to take him home, which by implication means that Area 51 and the secret stuff that we don't know about have developed and gone beyond what we've been told, and that we have, even back when Ben Rich retired several years ago, we had the technology of space flight. Okay. Now I want to go on and read a little bit more of that Enoch, the story there, and we're going to be in Enoch there on 8 again, and we're going to hear what he says about the watcher angels a little bit more. He said they made bracelets, ornaments, and the art of making up the eyes and of beautifying the eyelids, and the most precious and choice stones, and all kinds of colored dyes. So what is going on here? Well, the watchers, if you'll remember, were lustful and enamored over human women. And so they taught them to dress beautifully, how to dye their hair and to use makeup. They taught them how to wear stones and earrings and all. I don't know what all it was, but they taught them to do this. And a lot of people through the years I've come from a very conservative background, and some of the churches that I grew up in, there was this feeling that women shouldn't even wear makeup. And people through the years have said to me, well, okay, preacher, what do you think about women wearing makeup? And here's my reply. I said, well, you know, a little bit of paint makes any old barn look better. Now, ladies, I don't want to offend you, but I thought that was kind of humorous to think that just paint any old barn, it makes it look better. You get it, okay. Don't hate me, okay? I just thought that was funny. So they taught women how to seduce men and throw all piety and chastity away. Let's keep reading here what he says. And the world was changed, it said. And there was a great impiety and much fornication, and they went astray, and all their ways became corrupt. All their ways became corrupt. This was a pivot point, huge pivot point. Never again would the world be the same. This changed everything. The sexual revolution swept the planet, and men and angels abandoned God's laws of family and of fidelity and faithfulness to their spouses, and it was a time of tremendous confusion. Now I want to go to the And read just a little bit more. In Enoch, go back to chapter 7. They taught them charms and spells and showed them the cutting of roots and trees. Well, that sounds so primitive when it's first told. We think they taught them how to cut roots of trees and to to graft or whatever, and we get the impression that they crafted things. But if you remember what it says, and they taught them things after these. So the rudimentary beginnings. So this is biology, is what they're talking about. Biology and agronomy, how to work plants. But it went on to phase after phase after phase, and I suspect it was even got into the genetics of it here, and how to splice genes and crossbreed plants and mess with stuff like that. So the Watchers gave humanity defensive and offensive weapons, metalworking, and of course our imaginations can only limit where that went. The beautification of women, and taught them to be seductive, and to abandon chastity and faithfulness, and then of course medical sciences that included genetic manipulation, life extension, everything that we're hearing talked about today. I suspect they were doing it in those days, and then of course, and the world changed. Then comes this thought: does God want to keep humanity? Does He want to keep us locked down in the dark concerning advanced sciences and technologies? And the answer is no, He doesn't. But He wants to give it to us when we're ready to get it, when we have the need for it. So God will supply all our needs according to His riches in heaven. He will give mankind everything we need, but not prior to the time that we're able to handle it. For instance, I've thought this was always funny. When God, it's like giving a room full of monkeys nitroglycerin to play with in bottles. Okay, that's not a good idea. So God knew when it was right. This early stage of man's development wasn't right for this information. It's too much, too soon, and we would probably killed ourselves. So God was managing that, and as we need the technology and the new sciences, He will give them to us. We go back to those ancient stone works and the earthworks that are around the planet, and to build them, they built them and embedded within them ancient or tremendous mathematical formulas. And as modern people have studied the Great Pyramid at Giza and have measured it and did all kinds of calculations to it, it is absolutely amazing that what is embedded in that Giza pyramid. For instance, if all the land masses on planet Earth were pulled back together into one giant landmass, the Giza pyramid would be in the exact center of that landmass. The measurements of it measure the speed of light, can also measure the number of days in a year. In other words, one of the measurements was 365. As the measurements were done and then applied to modern understanding, the scientists are always blown away by how advanced this was. The Giza pyramid, was made to embed or to give us ancient knowledge, to say to us we were here and we were far advanced, more than you can imagine. Well, this is some of the things that went on. The Nazca lines in Peru, we only discovered in this generation of when we started flying, because the lines there in Peru, that desert, are so large you can't tell what they are from the ground. But when you get at altitude, if you're in a plane, then you can see all these amazing things they did there, and they drew in Nazca in Peru. And of course then all over the world, in China and in South America, the pyramids in India and Mexico, they show us something wild was going on here before we got here. Nimrod. Let's talk about Nimrod. Nimrod is the archetype of Antichrist. He was the first model of Antichrist. There have been a lot of Antichrists on planet Earth. Hitler, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great. These men who conquered and pulled nations together, tried to make a new world order, a new order where they were in charge of everything. So he was the first, Nimrod, and he's the archetype. So he was the son of Cush, the grandson of Ham, and so the antichrist that's going to come, that we read about in the book of Revelation, he comes in the model of Nimrod. There is some stuff that we read in Revelation that just blow your mind. Now let me just read it. In Revelation 17:8 it says, who was, is not, but will be again. Now that is said more than one time in the book of Revelation. So something about this Antichrist who's coming at the end has already been here. And then he wasn't here, and then he's here again. Now what are we talking about here? One of the ways to understand that is Nimrod, who was and now is not, and but might be coming again. Are they going to revive him? Are they going to genetically and transhumanly restore him and revive his genetics to make a new one? That would be, I don't know, but it certainly is something to think about. Nimrod is described as a mighty man. The word is Gibor. Could it be that Nimrod was born a human? We know he was the son of Cush and the grandson of Ham, which is a direct line back through Noah to the purity of the race. We know Noah was a pure human, and then his sons, etc. But now we trace that back, and suddenly, or somewhere in his life, Nimrod changed. He was a man, we know that, but now he's called a Gibor, which could translate mighty man, or it says in the Septuagint he was a giant. So there's a lot there that we need to dig into. Could it be that he somehow, through occult practices or some ritual way, or with demonic or fallen angel help, literally changed? Did he become something different? Something to think about. There's a Bible interpretive rule called the rule of first reference. And what that means is, to Bible students, is that when something is used, is stated or announced or defined or whatever in the Bible, early on in Genesis or wherever, the first time it's used, it will always define that all the way through the Bible. It doesn't change. And the first use of the word Gibor was in Genesis 6, when it talks about all this. Now, as I said, in the Septuagint, which was the first translation of the ancient Hebrew texts into Greek, when those 70 scholars got together, those Greek and Hebrew scholars, they got together to translate that into Greek. They translated it like this, and Nimrod began to be a giant upon the earth. So you see, at least the early translators saw something there in this that we needed to know. So how did it happen? Do we know anything about it? But we don't know all about it. But we do know this: Nimrod was the first world ruler. He ruled the whole world. He had pulled all men together. And he defied God's order. God said, go, and Nimrod said, nah, sorry. I'm going to read now from Revelation chapter 17. Turn to my study notes here. Revelation 17. It says, I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and comes up out of the abyss. But it says, has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw, get this now, once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. Wow. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now it is not, and yet will come again. All right. What in the world is going on here? I don't know. But it sure makes you wonder if old Nimrod could not be somehow brought back and will become, in essence, the antichrist that we read about in the book of Revelation. Adding more to the drama of this is when George H. Bush sent our troops into Afghanistan and Babylon during that Gulf War. There was a group of special operations soldiers and scientists, men in suits as it were sent to Baghdad to rescue, that was a term we got here, that was what our news said, is they were going to go rescue the museum in Baghdad. Well, there are films that were released on the internet that I've actually seen and heard reported of, but they saw this special ops group and these men in suits went into the Baghdad museum, and they went and they walked by artifacts of ancient artifacts of gold and other things that were worth small fortunes, and they walked right by them with little notice. In fact, I think I saw one where one of the soldiers picked up something that was golden and he just threw it on the floor. That's not what they were there for. So they went into a back room, and there in this back room was an oversized coffin, and that was what they had come for. And when they were excited when they saw it and they had found it, they were so glad. Well, they got it out of there and flew it out back to the United States. Could that have been the coffin that Nimrod was buried in, with his genetic remains there? That, I don't know, just something to think about. And now in Genesis chapter 10, we come across now the table of nations. And I'll read just a little of that. It's a long read, and our time, it will get by faster than I want to here, so I'm not going to take time to read it, but you need to read Genesis chapter 10 all the way down through, read the whole chapter 10, all about where it talks about the generations and who came after who. And then we get to the one final thing I want to talk about today, and that is from the Tower of Babel. We want to talk about Psalm 82, because in Psalm 82 we find that the gods came down. God came down. Who were these gods? God came down. It seems like there was others with him. We came down, etc. And I think if you read chapter 82 of Psalms, you'll get a picture of the council, the divine council, and you'll see how that works. And some of those those created beings who God allowed to meet with him in council to help, just not that God needed help, but he did it because he loves to share leadership with us and with these angels. But at least they came down and they confused the languages so that they would end the work on the Tower of Babel. Probably at least 70 languages that came out of that. Some say 72. Humanity was dispersed planet-wide, and the whatever the Tower of Babel was, it was shut down. And so then we have to deal with those questions. What was it about? Will Antichrist will it be the old Nimrod revived? Was the Tower of Babel was it a large collider, like a large hadron collider at CERN? Was that it? Did it open dimensional portals, or was that what they were building? It answers some of those questions. But here comes the final beautiful thing from this. This is why we're the Jewish people, God's chosen people. Why we're going to deal with in the next session. But let's talk about it just for a moment. At the Tower of Babel, when the languages were divided, he gave leadership to those, say 69, let's say there were 70. He gave leadership to the 69 nations that were divided. He gave leadership to watchers and other angels that were with him. He gave them leadership over those nations. to help guard and guide and protect them. But God himself, Jehovah God, Yahweh God, he took Israel for his own. He became the watcher, as it were, over Israel. And that's why they're called the chosen people, because God chose them. But all the other Gentile nations, he gave leadership to these lesser beings who rule over the planet even to this day and guide and guard. And if you would like to see how that comes about, and if you need a biblical source for that, read Deuteronomy chapter 32, and you'll see why. So, as I said, we're done. But why did God choose Israel? Because we're going to talk about that in specific detail in our next study of the pivot points. We'll explain why he chose them. But we want you to know that he did. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope this has created an appetite in you to learn more, to dig deeper into this, and to open your heart and see what God has done. We'll never have time to understand all this in this life or even in the next. It'll take us forever to know God. We'll never get tired of learning more things about him. So get your Bible, get to reading it, and be blessed. Well, I'm Scotty Killingsworth, pastor of the Sauk River Cowboy Church in Springfield, Missouri, and it is a delight to share this with you. I've enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. We'll see you next time. God bless.